Lilian Brooks, made exactly one mistake the night she walked into the Velvet Iris in Atlantic City. She thought it was just another audition. The club didn't look like the kind of place that would change her life. Sure, the chandeliers were probably worth more than her childhood home, and yeah, the doorman had checked her name against a list like she was entering a government building. But Lilian had sung in dive bars where the microphone shocked her and fancy hotels where nobody listened. This was just another gig, another chance to prove her voice mattered. She didn't know Nico Falco owned the place. She didn't know he owned half of Atlantic City, and she definitely didn't know he was sitting in the shadows when she sang. The audition room was smaller than she expected. Just a stage, a piano, and about 30 empty tables arranged like an audience that hadn't arrived yet. A man in an expensive suit, older, with gray hair, gestured toward the microphone without introducing himself. "Whenever you're ready," he said. Lilian chose a song her grandmother used to hum while baking. Something old, something that felt like home before everything got messy. She closed her eyes and let the first note fill the room. She didn't see Nico walk in, but he saw her. If you love stories about powerful men who fall hard, subscribe to Annie's Mafia stories because you're going to want to see how this ends. 3 days later, Lilian got a phone call that made her drop her coffee mug. "Miss Brooks, this is Matteo Ricci calling from the Velvet Iris. Mr. Falco would like to offer you a residency, 6 nights a week, starting Monday." Lilian's hand shook. What's the pay?" $15,000 a week." The mug fell to the floor. She'd been working 3 jobs. Her dad's medical bills were drowning them. Her younger brother, Jamie, had dropped out of college because they couldn't afford both tuition and keeping the lights on. $15,000 a week was not real. It was a typo. It had to be. "There's a mistake," she said carefully. "No mistake. Mr. Falco was very specific. He wants you." Something about the way Matteo said, "wants you," made her stomach flip. Not in a good way. In a "this seems too good to be true" way. "Can I think about it?" "Of course. He'll expect your answer tomorrow at 8. He's reserved a table at Marino's. The car will pick you up at 7:30. "Wait, I didn't agree to." The line went dead. Lilian stared at her phone. Then at the coffee spread across her kitchen floor. Then at the stack of bills on the counter that she couldn't pay. She went to dinner. Marino's was the kind of restaurant where they didn't list prices on the menu because if you had to ask, you couldn't afford it. Lilian wore the only dress she owned that wasn't from a thrift store, a simple black number her mom had bought her for graduation. She felt like a kid playing dress up. Nico Falco was already seated when she arrived. He stood when he saw her. That was the first surprise. Men with his kind of power usually didn't stand for anyone. "Miss Brooks," he said, and his voice was quieter than she expected, controlled, like every word was measured before it left his mouth. "Thank you for coming." Did I have a choice? She didn't mean to say it out loud. His mouth twitched, almost a smile. "Always. You always have a choice." They sat. A waiter appeared instantly with wine that could probably solve her problems right now. Lilian folded her hands in her lap. "Mr. Falco." "Nico." "Mr. Falco," she repeated firmly, "why would you pay me $15,000 a week to sing at your club? I'm nobody. There are 100 singers in this city with better credits." He didn't answer right away. Instead, he looked at her the same way he'd probably looked at contracts before signing them. Carefully. "You have something they don't," he said finally. "What?" "Honesty." Lilian blinked. "I don't understand." "When you sing, you mean it. Everyone else is performing. You're telling the truth." He leaned back slightly. "That's rare, especially in my world." "What world is that exactly?" "One where people usually want something from me. And I don't. You didn't even know who I was." That was fair. She Googled him after the phone call. The articles were vague, but impressive. Business owner, real estate, connections to city officials. Nothing concrete, but the kind of nothing that felt intentional. "I need the money," Lilian said, because pretending otherwise seemed pointless. "My dad is sick. My brother needs to go back to school. So yes, I want something from you too." Nico's expression didn't change, but something flickered in his eyes. Approval, maybe. Then we understand each other, he said. You sing. I pay you. Simple. It didn't feel simple. But Lilian signed the contract that night anyway. The first week at the Velvet Iris was strange. The club itself was beautiful, all dark wood and vintage elegance, like stepping into a 1940s movie. Her dressing room had flowers delivered every day, different kinds. Peonies on Monday, gardenias on Tuesday, lavender on Wednesday. There was never a card. She asked Matteo about it on Thursday. Mr. Falco likes to make sure his performers are comfortable, Matteo said smoothly, not quite looking at her. Does he send flowers to all of them? You're the only singer we have right now, Miss Brooks. Lilian performed 6 nights a week, just like the contract said. The audiences were always well-dressed, always quiet while she sang, always generous with applause. And Nico was always there. She never saw him arrive, never saw him leave. But halfway through her first song, she'd spot him in the back corner, sitting alone at a table meant for 6. He never clapped. He just watched. It should have felt creepy. Maybe it did, a little. But there was something about the way he watched that didn't feel predatory. He looked like someone listening to a language they'd forgotten and were desperate to remember. After 2 weeks, Lilian worked up the courage to approach his table after a set. Do you take requests? She asked. Nico glanced up from the glass of whiskey he'd been staring into. What kind of requests? Song requests. You're here every night. I figured you might have a favorite. He considered this for a long moment. Sing whatever you want. That's not helpful. I don't want you to perform for me, Miss Brooks. I want you to sing for yourself. Lilian frowned. That doesn't make sense. You're paying me. I'm paying you to be honest. The moment you start trying to please me, you'll stop being worth listening to. It was maybe the strangest compliment anyone had ever given her. 3 weeks in, Lilian's dad called with good news. The hospital had mysteriously forgiven half his medical debt. Some clerical error, they said, a grant he qualified for that nobody had noticed before. Can you believe it? Her dad laughed, sounding lighter than he had in months. $30,000 just gone. It's a miracle, Lil. Lilian's stomach dropped. She knew it wasn't a miracle. She confronted Nico the next night, catching him before he could disappear into whatever back office he vanished to after her performances. Did you pay my father's medical bills? Nico didn't even pretend to be confused. Part of them. I didn't ask you to do that. I know. So, why did you? He looked at her with those 2 careful eyes. You were worried. It was distracting you. Now you're not worried. You can't just fix people's problems without asking. Why not? Because then they owe you. You don't owe me anything, Lilian. It was the first time he'd used her first name. Your contract hasn't changed. Your salary hasn't changed. This was separate. Nothing is separate with people like you. She regretted it immediately. His expression shuddered completely, going blank in a way that was somehow worse than anger. People like me, he repeated quietly. I didn't mean. Yes, you did. He straightened his cuffs, a gesture so controlled it felt practiced. You're right to be cautious, Miss Brooks. In my experience, kindness usually comes with strings attached. But occasionally. He paused, seeming to choose his next words very carefully. Occasionally, people do things simply because they can. Because someone they respect is suffering, and they have the means to help. You don't even know me. I know you sing like you're trying to save something. I know you take the bus 40 minutes each way instead of accepting the car service I offered. I know you send most of your paycheck home and live on pasta and hope. He tilted his head slightly. Should I go on? Lilian's heart was doing something complicated in her chest. You've been watching me. I pay attention to things that matter. I'm just a singer you hired. If that were true, we wouldn't be having this conversation. Before Lilian could figure out how to respond to that, Matteo appeared from nowhere, whispering something urgent in Italian. Nico's entire demeanor shifted, instantly, going from almost vulnerable to completely controlled. Excuse me, he said, already walking away. Enjoy your evening, Miss Brooks. Lilian stood alone in the empty club, surrounded by chairs being stacked by staff who pretended not to notice her and realized with absolute certainty that she was in way over her head. The flowers in her dressing room the next day were forget-me-nots. Still no card. But this time, Lilian understood the message anyway. A month into her residency at the Velvet Iris, Lilian's life had become something she barely recognized. Her bank account had numbers she'd never seen before. Her dad was getting better. Jamie had re-enrolled in college. Everything should have felt perfect. Instead, she felt like she was living in someone else's story. The weirdest part wasn't the money or the flowers, or even Nico's intense attention during her performances. The weirdest part was how he never crossed the line. He never touched her, never made inappropriate comments, never did any of the things powerful men usually did when they wanted something from women they'd hired. He just existed in her orbit like a planet with its own gravity, pulling everything slightly off-center. "You're overthinking it," her roommate Casey said when Lilian tried to explain. "Rich guy likes your voice. Pays you well. Doesn't harass you. That's literally the dream. But why me? Why not you? Lil, you're crazy talented. Maybe he just has good taste." Except Lilian had been singing her entire life, and nobody had ever looked at her the way Nico did. Like she was something rare. Something that might disappear if he looked away too long. It made her nervous. It made her curious. It made her feel things she definitely shouldn't feel about her extremely mysterious and probably dangerous employer. The shift happened on a Tuesday. Lilian arrived for her sound check and found a dress hanging in her dressing room. Not just any dress. The kind of dress that belonged in movies, all deep emerald silk and vintage elegance. The kind that probably costs more than she used to make in 6 months. This time, there was a card. For tonight's performance. You don't have to wear it. But green is your color. N. Lilian held the fabric between her fingers, feeling the weight of it. The implication of it. She wore it anyway. The reaction when she walked on stage was immediate. The usual quiet audience went completely silent, like she'd stolen the air from the room. And Nico, sitting at his corner table, went absolutely still. Their eyes met across the dim lighting. Something unspoken passed between them. Lilian sang differently that night. She couldn't help it. Every song felt like a conversation she was having with one specific person, and for the first time since starting at the Velvet Iris, she wasn't singing for herself. She was singing for him. When her set ended, Nico was gone. But Mateo was waiting in her dressing room, holding an envelope. "Mr. Falco requests your company for dinner tomorrow evening. 7 o'clock. Casual. His personal car will collect you." Mateo's expression was carefully neutral. He emphasized that you're welcome to decline. No professional consequences if you do. Lilian stared at the envelope, which contained an address to a restaurant she'd never heard of. "What if I say no?" "Then I tell him you said no, and nothing changes. You keep singing. He keeps listening. Everything continues exactly as it has been. And if I say yes?" Mateo almost smiled. "Then things probably get complicated." Lilian went home that night and stared at her ceiling for 3 hours, weighing every possibility. This was clearly crossing from professional into personal territory. Nico Falco was her boss. He was also possibly involved in things she didn't want to think about too carefully. Getting closer to him was objectively a bad idea. She texted Mateo at 2 in the morning, "Tell him yes." The restaurant was in a neighborhood Lilian had never visited, tucked between buildings that looked abandoned but probably weren't. No sign outside, just a red door with a small bronze plaque that said Rossetti's in script so subtle she almost missed it. The car, a sleek black sedan driven by a quiet man who introduced himself as Gio, had picked her up exactly at 6:30. Lilian had changed outfits 4 times before settling on jeans and a nice sweater. Casual Mateo had said she hoped this qualified. Inside, Rossetti's was tiny. Maybe 6 tables total. Only one was occupied. Nico stood when she entered, and Lilian noticed he wasn't wearing a suit. Just dark pants and a simple button-down with the sleeves rolled to his elbows. She'd never seen him look so normal. You found it, he said. Your driver is very efficient. Joe's been with me for years. He could find a specific grain of sand in the Sahara if I asked. Nico pulled out her chair. Thank you for coming. You made it sound optional. It was optional. You still came. They sat. Unlike Marino's, there was no wine waiting. No elaborate menu. Just an older woman who emerged from the kitchen, took one look at them, and disappeared again without speaking. We don't order here, Nico explained. Signora Rossetti cooks whatever she feels like cooking. You eat what she makes, or you don't eat. That seems inefficient. She's been doing it for 40 years. People come from 3 states away hoping for a table. How did you get a reservation? Something flickered across his face. I helped her son once. She remembers favors. Before Lilian could ask what kind of help, Signora Rossetti returned with 2 plates of pasta that smelled like heaven. Fresh tomatoes, basil, and something with lemon. Simple but perfect. They ate in silence for a few minutes. Then Nico said, Tell me something true. Lilian glanced up. What? Something true about you. Something you wouldn't normally share. That's an odd request. I'm an odd person. He set down his fork. I'll go first if it helps. Something true about me. I haven't trusted anyone completely in 7 years. Not since my business partner, someone I considered a brother, sold information about my holdings to a rival for $2 million. He smiled at my face every day for 6 months while planning to destroy everything I'd built. His voice was calm, but his hands were tense. I bought his loyalty for years, protected his family, and the moment someone offered him enough money, I became irrelevant. Lilian's throat felt tight. What happened to him? Nothing violent, if that's what you're worried about. I just made sure everyone in our industry knew exactly what he'd done. He's persona non grata now. Works at a car dealership in Pennsylvania. Nico picked up his wine glass. I didn't need revenge. I needed him to understand that some betrayals cost more than money. That's depressing. It's honest. He looked at her steadily. Your turn. Lilian took a breath. Something true about me. I'm terrified that I'm not actually talented, that maybe I just got lucky with you, and when this job ends, I'll go back to being invisible. That my voice only matters because someone powerful decided it does. That's not true. You don't know that. I do, actually. I've hired a dozen singers over the years for various venues. Good voices, professional, perfectly fine. I forgot all of them. He leaned forward slightly. But 3 minutes into your audition, I called my attorney and had him draft a contract specifically designed to keep you from working anywhere else. Not because I'm possessive, but because I knew if I didn't act immediately, someone else would realize what I'd found. Lilian's heart was doing that complicated thing again. What did you find? Someone who can't lie when she sings. Someone who makes a room full of criminals and liars stop and remember they used to be human. His intensity was almost overwhelming. You're not talented because I noticed you, Lilian. I noticed you because you're genuinely extraordinary. The weight of his words sat between them like a third presence at the table. Signora Rossetti appeared with dessert, broke the moment, and vanished again. They talked for 2 more hours about everything except work. Lilian learned that Nico had grown up in Atlantic City, that his mother had died when he was 16, that he'd taught himself piano but never played for anyone. She told him about her grandmother's bakery, about the summer she spent in the city trying to make it and coming home broke, about how singing was the only thing that made sense when everything else felt chaotic. When Gio drove her home that night, Lilian sat in the back seat feeling like she'd just stepped off a carnival ride. Dizzy, exhilarated, and slightly terrified. Her phone buzzed before she reached her apartment. A text from an unknown number. Thank you for the honesty. Sleep well. N. She saved the contact immediately. The next 3 weeks were a study in chaos. Nico started appearing at random moments. Not at the club, but in her regular life. She would grab coffee at her usual cafe and find him in line behind her, looking genuinely surprised to see her even though Atlantic City had 200 coffee shops. She would browse a bookstore on her day off and discover him in the history section, debating the merits of different World War II accounts with the owner. "Are you following me?" she asked the third time it happened. Following implies intent. "I'm simply existing in the same city." But his mouth did that almost smile thing. "A city where you happen to be at the same farmer's market I visit every Saturday? I like fresh vegetables, Lilian. Is that a crime?" She couldn't help laughing. The thing was, it never felt invasive. Nico never pushed. If she seemed uncomfortable, he'd nod politely and leave. If she lingered, he'd fall into step beside her, talking about everything and nothing. He bought her coffee twice. She bought him a book once, a mystery novel she'd mentioned loving. He texted her 3 days later, finished it, "You were right about the ending." It felt like friendship, except friends didn't look at each other the way they did when they thought the other wasn't watching. Everything changed on a random Thursday in October. Lilian was walking to the club for her evening performance when a man stepped into her path. He was older, he wore an expensive suit, and a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Miss Brooks," he said pleasantly, "my name is Vincent Dario. I represent several entertainment venues in the tri-state area. I'd love to discuss some opportunities with you. I have a contract with the Velvet Iris. Contracts can be negotiated. I'm prepared to offer you triple what Falco's paying, plus creative control, plus a signing bonus." His smile widened. 50,000 up front, just to hear our full proposal. Lillian's instinct screamed danger. "I'm not interested." "You haven't heard the offer." "I don't need to. I'm happy where I am." Vincent's expression hardened slightly. "Nico Falco is a complicated man, Miss Brooks. Are you sure you know what you're involved in?" "I'm not involved in anything." "No." He pulled out his phone and showed her a photo. Lilian and Nico at the farmer's market laughing about something. Another photo from the bookstore. A third from the cafe. "Looks pretty involved to me." Cold dread settled in Lilian's stomach. "Who are you?" "Someone who's been in this business longer than Falco has been alive. Someone who knows that little birds who fly too close to dangerous men usually end up with broken wings." Vincent pocketed his phone. "Think about my offer, Miss Brooks, before you get hurt." He walked away before Lilian could respond. She made it to her dressing room, locked the door, and tried to steady her breathing. Someone knocked softly. "Lilian?" Nico's voice concerned. "Mateo said you looked upset." She opened the door. Nico took one look at her face, and his entire demeanor shifted. "What happened?" "A man stopped me. Vincent Dario. He said—" "What did he say?" The temperature in the room seemed to drop. Lilian told him everything. The offer, the photos, the thinly veiled threat. Nico's jaw tightened, but his voice stayed calm. "Did he touch you?" "No." "Good." He pulled out his phone and sent a quick text. "Gio will drive you home tonight. Tomorrow, he'll pick you up from your apartment and stay with you until you're inside the club. I'll handle Dario." "What does that mean?" "It means he made a mistake thinking you were a vulnerability. I'd tolerate being threatened." Nico met her eyes. "You're under my protection, Lilian. He just reminded me to make that explicitly clear. I don't want to be protected like I'm some possession." "You're not a possession. You're—" He stopped himself, seeming to struggle with what to say next. "You're important to me. That makes you a target. I'm sorry. I should have anticipated this." Lilian's heart was racing. "Important how?" Nico looked at her for a long moment, and for once his careful control cracked completely. "How do you think?" Then Mateo appeared in the doorway, breaking the moment. "Boss, we have a situation." Nico's mask slammed back into place. "I have to go. Please let Gio take you home. We'll talk tomorrow." He left before Lilian could respond. She performed that night in a daze, barely remembering the songs. When she got home, she found a text from Nico. "You were brilliant tonight. Even distracted, you're extraordinary." She fell asleep holding her phone, and tried not to think about what important actually meant. The morning after Vincent Dario's threat, Lilian woke up to 17 missed calls from her brother Jamie. She called back immediately, panic flooding through her. "Lil, thank God." Jamie sounded breathless. Someone paid my entire tuition for the semester, all of it, plus housing. The school said it came from an anonymous donor, but that's like $40,000. Do you know anything about this? Lilian's stomach sank. She knew exactly who'd done it. I'll call you back, she managed, then hung up and immediately dialed Nico. He answered on the first ring. Good morning. You paid my brother's college tuition? Yes. After I specifically asked you not to do things like that, you asked me not to do it without asking. I'm not asking. His voice was calm. Dario made it clear yesterday that people close to you could become targets. Your brother is vulnerable at school, hours away, unprotected. If he's financially secure there, he stays there, away from danger, away from anyone who might use him to get to you. Lilian sat down hard on her couch. This isn't normal, Nico. Nothing about my life is normal. Exactly. And I'm getting pulled into it without understanding what IT even is. There was silence on the other end. Then, you're right. We should talk. Actually talk. Can I send a car for you? Where? My home. Not a restaurant nor a club. Somewhere private where we can be completely honest. Every self-preservation instinct Lilian had screamed to say no. She said yes anyway. Nico's house wasn't what she expected. She pictured some massive estate, all cold marble and intimidating architecture. Instead, Gio drove her to a surprisingly normal brownstone in a quiet neighborhood. Flower boxes in the windows. A small front garden. The kind of place that could belong to a lawyer or a doctor. Nico answered the door himself, wearing jeans and a sweater that made him look younger. More approachable. Come in, he said quietly. The inside matched the outside. Comfortable furniture. Books everywhere. Warm lighting. A piano in the corner that looked well used. You play, Lilian observed. When I can't sleep. He gestured to the couch. Coffee? Tea? Answers, actually. Nico nodded slowly, sat across from her, and for the first time since they'd met, looked uncertain. What do I know? Everything. Who you really are. What you really do. Why does Vincent Dario think getting close to you is dangerous for me? That's a long conversation. I have time. Nico studied her for a moment, then stood and walked to a cabinet. He pulled out a folder, thick with papers, and set it on the coffee table between them. This is a background report on me, professionally compiled, completely accurate. I had it prepared 2 days ago because I knew we'd eventually reach this moment. He didn't touch it. You can read it or I can summarize. Your choice. Lilian's hands shook slightly as she picked up the folder. It was thorough, very thorough. Details about Nico's family history, his business dealings, and his associations. The words organized crime appeared multiple times. So did phrases like under investigation and suspected involvement. But there were also tax returns showing legitimate businesses, charitable donations to hospitals and schools, letters from community leaders praising his support for neighborhood revitalization. It was complicated, gray in ways that made Lilian's head hurt. You're Mafia, she said finally. My family has historical connections to organizations that operate outside legal boundaries. Yes, I've spent the last 10 years trying to legitimize those operations. Some of my income is completely clean. Some exist in gray areas. Some. He paused. Some I'm not proud of. Like what? Protection services for businesses that don't trust police. Financial arrangements that avoid traditional banking regulations. Information brokering. His voice was steady but strained. Nothing violent. I made that boundary very clear when I took over for my uncle. No drugs, no trafficking, nothing that directly hurts innocents. But I'm not a good man by conventional standards, Lilian. I'm just trying to be better than the men who came before me. Lilian set down the folder. Why are you telling me this? Because Vincent Dario is right. Getting close to me comes with risks. Rival families who see you as leverage. Federal investigations that might sweep you up as a witness. The constant uncertainty of not knowing which version of me you're getting on any given day. He leaned forward, elbows on his knees. You deserve to make an informed choice about whether I'm worth those risks. And if I decide you're not? Pain flickered across his face. Then Geo drives you home. Your contract at the Velvet Iris continues unchanged. I stay away from you personally. You get to live your life without my complications. Just like that. Just like that. His voice dropped, but I need you to know something first. Something I've never told anyone. Lilian waited. When my partner betrayed me 7 years ago, it wasn't just about money. I'd trusted him with something personal. Told him about my mother, about how she died, about the guilt I carried, and he used that information to manipulate me, made me doubt myself, made me believe I deserved the betrayal because of who I was. Nico's hands clenched. I swore I'd never give anyone that kind of power again. I'd never care about someone enough to be vulnerable. But, Lilian whispered, but then you walked into my club and sang like you were trying to heal something broken in the world. And every time I saw you after that, you were just real. You didn't want anything from me. You didn't even particularly like me at first. A ghost of a smile. You still bought me that book. You still laughed at my terrible jokes. Still looked at me like maybe I wasn't completely irredeemable. He stood, walked to the window, keeping his back to her. I'm not good at this. At feelings. At being honest about what I want. But I need you to understand that you're not just important to me, Lilian. You're the first thing that's felt important in 7 years. The first person who makes me want to be better instead of just less terrible. Lilian's throat was tight. Nico, I'm in love with you. The words came out rough, unpracticed. I don't know when it happened. Maybe that first night. Maybe gradually. But it's the truth, and you deserve to know it before you decide whether to walk away. The silence that followed was enormous. Lilian stood slowly, crossed the room until she was right behind him. Turn around, she said softly. He did. I read that entire folder, Lilian said. Every page. Every detail. And you know what scared me most? That I'm dangerous? That I don't care as much as I should? She took a shaky breath. I should be running. Every logical part of my brain is screaming to run. But I keep thinking about the flowers you sent without signing them. About how you paid my dad's bills and wouldn't take credit. About the way you listen when I sing like it's the only thing in the world that matters. Lilian, I'm not finished. She stepped closer. I'm also thinking about how you respected every boundary I set. How you made sure I always had a choice. How you're giving me one right now, even though it's clearly killing you. Her voice cracked. You're a criminal and a businessman and probably a dozen other things I don't understand. But you're also the first person who's ever made me feel seen. Not my voice. Not my potential. Me. Nico's eyes looked vulnerable. So, what are you saying? I'm saying I'm probably making the worst decision of my life. But I'm choosing you anyway. The relief that washed over his face was staggering. You're sure? Not even a little bit. But maybe that's how the important things work. You jump and hope someone catches you. I'll catch you, Nico said quietly, reverently. I promise I'll catch you. They stood there, inches apart, and for a moment Lilian thought he might kiss her. But instead, he just took her hand and held it like it was something precious. Can I show you something? He asked. Okay. He led her to the piano, sat down, and patted the bench beside him. When she sat, he placed his hands on the keys and started playing. Just a simple melody that sounded like sunlight through windows. I wrote this the week after you started at the club, he said while playing. I couldn't stop thinking about your voice, about how it made me feel. So I tried to translate it into something I could understand. The melody shifted, became more complex, layered with emotion. It's beautiful, Lilian whispered. It's yours. I want you to have it. Lyrics, arrangement, everything. Your song. Your choice what to do with it. Lilian felt tears prick her eyes. Nobody's ever written me a song before. Then everyone before me was an idiot. She laughed through the tears, and Nico stopped playing to look at her with such open affection that it hurt. What happens now? She asked. Now, I do everything in my power to deserve you. And you keeping honest with me when I inevitably mess it up. He squeezed her hand gently. And maybe, if you want, we can figure out what this looks like together. I'd like that. They sat together at the piano for another hour, Nico playing while Lilian hummed melodies, creating something new from the broken pieces they'd both been carrying. It wasn't perfect, but it was real, and somehow that was better. The next few months were a careful dance of learning from each other. Nico took Lilian to the art museum on Tuesday mornings when it was nearly empty. They'd stand in front of paintings, making up ridiculous stories about the subjects until the security guards gave them disapproving looks. He taught her to play poker, then pretended to be devastated when she beat him 3 hands in a row. "You're hustling me," he accused. "You're just bad at bluffing. I negotiate multimillion-dollar deals. I'm excellent at bluffing. Not with me." And that was the truth of it. With Lilian, Nico couldn't pretend or hide. She met Matteo properly over coffee, learned he'd been Nico's friend since childhood, and was actually an accountant who'd helped legitimize half of Nico's businesses. She met Joe's wife, Elena, who ran a bakery that supplied the Velvet Iris and had opinions about everything. "You're good for him," Elena told Lilian while boxing up fresh bread. "He smiles now. Real smiles. Haven't seen that in years." "He smiled before, though." "No, he performs smiling. Different thing entirely." Lilian performed at the club 6 nights a week still, but now Nico would occasionally join her on stage, playing piano while she sang. The audience loved it. She loved it more. Everything felt fragile and perfect, but temporary in the way good things always do. Until that night, Lilian arrived at the club for her Friday performance to find the dressing room destroyed. Flowers shredded, mirrors broken, and on the wall, spray painted in red, "Sing for me instead." Matteo found her staring at the mess and called Nico immediately. He arrived in under 10 minutes, took one look at the destruction, and his expression went absolutely cold. "Vincent Dario," he said quietly. "How do you know?" "Because I warned him last week to stay away from you. Apparently, he's decided to test my resolve." Nico pulled out his phone. "Lilian, I need you to stay with Gio and Elena tonight. They're home, not your apartment." "I'm not hiding." "You're not hiding. You're being safe while I handle this." "Handle it how?" He looked at her with those careful eyes, and she saw the other side of him. The dangerous side. The part that lived in the gray areas. "Do you trust me?" he asked. Lilian thought about everything they'd built. Every honest conversation. Every moment of vulnerability. "Yes." "Then trust me to protect you. Please." She went with Gio. 2 days later, Vincent Dario's entertainment empire collapsed. Federal investigations. Tax fraud. Money laundering. It hit the news like an explosion. Within 72 hours, Dario was under arrest, his assets frozen, and his reputation destroyed. Lilian watched it happen from Elena's living room and knew with absolute certainty that Nico had made it happen. When he finally came to get her, she didn't ask how, just looked at him and said, "Tell me you didn't do anything you can't come back from." "I didn't. I just gave the authorities information they should have had years ago, information I'd been holding as insurance." He touched her face gently. "I didn't become a monster for you, Lilian. I just stopped protecting one. Is it over?" "This part is. There will be other things, other threats. That's the reality of who I am." His voice was careful. "I'll understand if that's not what you signed up for." Lilian took a deep breath. "I signed up for you. All of you. Complicated and protective and occasionally terrifying, but also kind and talented, and the only person who's ever made me feel like I matter for more than my voice. You matter for everything. Then we will figure it out together. The threats, the complications, all of it." Nico pulled her close, not kissing, just holding. "I don't deserve you." "Probably not. But you're stuck with me anyway." 6 months later, Lilian Brooks released her first album. Half original songs, half carefully chosen covers. The title track was The Ghost, and the song, written on a Tuesday morning at Nico's piano while he made terrible coffee and offered even worse lyrical suggestions. It went platinum in 8 weeks. The dedication page read, For N, who taught me that being seen is more valuable than being heard. Nico framed it and hung it in his office, right next to his mother's photograph. They never talked about marriage or forever or any of the traditional things people in love discussed. But every Tuesday, Nico played piano while Lilian sang. Every Saturday, they went to the farmer's market and argued about which vegetables were superior. Every night she performed, he sat in his corner table and watched her like she was the only light in a very dark world. And maybe that's what love was supposed to be. Not perfect, not without complications or fear, but real, honest, two people choosing each other every single day despite all the reasons they probably shouldn't. Lilian still got nervous before performances. She still got worried about her family, still questioned whether she was truly talented or just lucky. But when she walked off stage and saw Nico waiting with that smile, looking at her like she'd hung the moon and painted the stars, she remembered what he'd told her that first night at his house. "You're not talented because I noticed you. I noticed you because you're genuinely extraordinary." And slowly, carefully, she started to believe it. Not because a powerful man told her so, but because she'd learned to see herself through eyes that loved her completely. The end. Thanks for watching Annie's Mafia stories. If you loved Nico and Lilian's journey, hit that like button and let me know in the comments what moment got you most emotional. And don't forget to subscribe because I've got more beautiful love stories coming your way. See you in the next one.